The video lasted 11 seconds. Stella watched it 4 times, each loop tightening the knot in her chest. Grainy surveillance footage. A parking garage. George, calm, composed George, being guided into a black SUV by 2 men in gray suits. No struggle. No screaming. Just a hand on his shoulder, a door closing, and then nothing. Beneath the clip, a single line of text, "You're next, counselor." Her wine glass hit the floor before she realized she'd dropped it. She had 40 minutes. Maybe less. Stella had built the burn plan 3 years ago, back when she was still at Harmon and Voss, when she learned, truly learned, what some of her clients were capable of. She'd never expected to use it. She'd prayed she wouldn't. But her hands were already moving, muscle memory overriding the panic screaming through her bloodstream. Burner phone from the hallway vent. Cash envelope from behind the kitchen panel. Passport under the name Claire Renaud, tucked inside a hollowed-out copy of Black's Law Dictionary. She had 4 safe houses. The first 2 were burned. She'd never trusted them fully. The 3rd was in Trenton. The 4th, nobody knew about. Not even David. Especially not David. She grabbed nothing sentimental. No photos. No jewelry. Just the drive, the encrypted drive with everything she documented over 18 months, and slipped into the November dark through the back gate. 2 blocks away, headlights flooded the alley behind her. Stella didn't look back. She ran. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket, the burner, not her real phone. She hadn't given this number to anyone. Anyone. She stopped breathing and answered it. The voice on the other end was quiet. Controlled. The kind of quiet that had been practiced. "Don't hang up." Stella's back hit the alley wall. "Who is this?" "Someone who wants George Harmon buried just as badly as you do." A pause. Maybe more. Her mind was already cataloging male, mid-30s, faint mid-Atlantic accent, 0 tremor in his voice. Whoever this was, he wasn't afraid. That terrified her more than anything. "Prove you're not one of his." A photo landed in her texts before he finished his next breath. Her stomach dropped. It was her, taken 3 hours ago, through her own kitchen window. He'd been watching her before she'd even seen the video. "I've been watching George for 2 years, the voice continued. "I know where the bodies are, Stella." Literally. That's not an answer. "Who are you?" Silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Then, "My name is Nathaniel Harmon." The ground shifted beneath her feet. George's brother. The one nobody talked about. Passed over for partner despite graduating top of his class. Quietly exiled to the firm's DC satellite office after he'd asked too many questions about the Meridian accounts. She'd assumed he'd simply disappeared into irrelevance. She'd been wrong. Nathaniel. They took George because he found out someone inside was planning to hand the Meridian files to the feds. "He thought it was you." His voice finally cracked, just barely. "It wasn't." "Then who?" Another photo hit her screen. This one made her knees buckle. It was a face she knew. Someone she'd trusted completely. Someone with full access to everything. Her assistant. And standing beside her assistant in the photo, smiling like he owned the world, was a federal prosecutor Stella had once called her closest friend. George Harmon hadn't slept in 60 hours. The bourbon helped. The rage helped more. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, watching the city below like a general surveying a battlefield he was losing. 3 missed calls from the Salcedo family. 2 from the Marchetti Consigliera. 1, devastatingly, from his own mother, and she never called. Eleanor Harmon communicated through lawyers and silence. A phone call meant only one thing. She was moving against him. "They're saying you've lost control." His lieutenant, Reyes, delivered the words carefully, the way you'd hand someone a live grenade. "The families want reassurance. They want. I know what they want." George's voice was stripped of its usual velvet. Raw. Exposed. "They want blood. Fine. I'll give them blood." The twins. 2 loose ends he'd allowed to breathe out of sentiment. a weakness he now wore like a brand. Stella with her files, the other with her testimony. Together they were a lit match hovering over everything he'd built across 30 years. His mother had called them his blind spot. His mother had been right. That alone made him want to burn the world down. He buttoned his own jacket, waved Reyes aside, and walked toward the door. "Sir," Reyes stepped forward. "We have people for this. Your people have had 4 days." George turned slowly. The look in his eyes made Reyes step back. "I'll handle it myself." He was in the elevator when his phone lit up a live feed from the Trenton safe house. Motion detected. A figure moving through the back entrance. George smiled for the first time in days. He zoomed in. But the face looking directly into the hidden camera wasn't Stella's. It was his mother's. The results were 3 pages long. George read only the last line. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. He set the paper down with the careful precision of a man choosing not to detonate. Around him, his penthouse hummed with its usual quiet luxury, climate-controlled, curated, untouchable. He had built this world to be impenetrable. Vanessa had walked through it like it was nothing. He didn't rage. Not yet. He pulled up her contact, dialed, and listened to it ring 7 times before her voicemail answered with that warm, practiced laugh that had once made him feel chosen. Special. He ended the call without a word. She was already gone. She'd known before he did. By noon, he understood the true damage. Someone had leaked the results. His own physician's office, he suspected, bought and flipped like everything else around him lately. By 3 p.m., the Marchetti family had canceled their dinner. By 5, the Salcedo sent back his gift unopened with no note. In the underworld's brutal arithmetic, a man who couldn't control his own bedroom couldn't control anything. Reyes wouldn't meet his eyes. George stood before his bathroom mirror, studying the face that had made boardrooms go silent and enemies disappear. 54 years old. Built from granite and sacrifice. Reduced in 24 hours to a punchline whispered between crime families over dinner. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, no text, just a video file. He pressed play. Vanessa. Laughing. Sitting across a restaurant table from a man whose face George knew intimately. Nathaniel. His own brother had engineered every single moment of this. The pregnancy. The leak. The humiliation. A surgical demolition disguised as betrayal. And in Vanessa's hand, clearly visible, was Stella's encrypted drive. Eleanor Harmon called a press conference at 10 in the morning, which meant she'd planned it the night before, which meant she'd known everything before George had. He watched it from a burner laptop in the back of a moving car, his knuckles white against the seat. She looked magnificent. 71 years old in a steel gray Chanel suit, silver hair swept back like a crown, standing before a podium draped in the quiet authority of inherited wealth. She spoke softly. She always spoke softly. It was how she'd buried 3 business rivals and 1 inconvenient husband. "My grandchildren are out there," Eleanor said, her voice catching with grandmother's precision. "I am offering $2 million for information leading to their safe return. I only want to protect the bloodline." $2 million. Stella saw it from a cracked motel television in a room registered under Claire Renault. The word bloodline landed like a slap. Eleanor wasn't appealing to law enforcement or the public. She was speaking directly to every bounty hunter, street-level informant, and ambitious criminal who owed the Harmon family a favor or wanted to earn one. Within an hour, Stella's burn phone rang 4 times from numbers she didn't recognize. She answered none of them. Nathaniel's text arrived at 11:23 a.m. She just activated every asset George couldn't move. Now, Stella was already moving, twins bundled against her chest, slipping through the motel's service exit into the gray morning. She had 1 safe house left. 1 name nobody knew. She was 3 blocks away when she saw the black SUV parked facing her direction. And standing beside it, arms folded, watching her with the patient stillness of someone who had never once been outmaneuvered, was Eleanor herself. Stella stopped running at 2:47 a.m. She sat in the last safe house, a forgettable studio above a dry cleaner in Newark, twins asleep behind her in a second-hand crib, and made a decision that felt less like courage and more like the absence of any remaining fear. She opened the encrypted drive. 18 months of documentation stared back at her. Wire transfers. Suppressed medical records showing George had ordered the falsification of paternity tests for 4 other women before her. Surveillance logs. And the video, 11 seconds of George on a secure call, his voice unmistakable, authorizing a disappearance with the same casual tone he used to order scotch. Her hands didn't shake. She was past shaking. She'd had one federal contact she'd never burned, Assistant U.S. Attorney Diana Reese, who'd been building a RICO case against the Harmon Empire for 3 years and hitting walls that smelled like George's money. Stella encrypted the package 3 separate ways, routed it through 2 offshore servers Nathaniel had set up, and sent it at 3:04 a.m. By 5 a.m., Reese had responded with 2 words, "We're moving." By 7 a.m., it was everywhere. Every major outlet. Every legal blog. George Harmon's name detonating across headlines like a controlled demolition. The hit order video played on loop on cable news, his voice stripped of all its careful armor, exposed and naked and damning. Stella exhaled for the first time in days. Then her door shook, 3 hard knocks, not a knock so much as a warning. She grabbed the twins and backed toward the window. Stella. The voice through the door was calm. Familiar. Devastating. It was Diana Reese. "We need to talk about Nathaniel. He isn't who you think he is." The location was Nathaniel's idea, a private dining room above a midtown restaurant owned by a neutral party, the kind of place where dangerous people made civilized arrangements. Stella arrived first, twins with Nathaniel 3 blocks away, one hand on her phone and the other steady at her side. Eleanor arrived exactly on time. Of course she did. She sat without being invited, ordered tea without consulting a menu, and studied Stella the way a jeweler examines a stone, looking for fractures. "You're tougher than I expected," Eleanor said finally. "George always chose beautiful. He rarely chose formidable. I didn't come for compliments." "No." Eleanor folded her hands. "You came because you're out of moves. And you think I am too." Stella laid a single photograph on the table, the Meridian account ledgers, George's signature on every page. Then a second document. The Moretti succession clause, buried in a 1987 partnership agreement that George had never bothered reading because he'd assumed he'd outlive everyone who had. Eleanor's composure flickered. "Just barely. Just enough." "You control the evidence," Stella said. "I control what gets released and when. You want George gone and the organization intact. I want full legal immunity and my children to never look over their shoulders." She held the older woman's gaze. "We want the same thing." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Outside, Manhattan moved in its indifferent roar. "Agreed," she said simply. They didn't shake hands. Women like them didn't need to. Stella was almost to the door when Eleanor spoke again, her voice stripped of its performance for the first and only time. "You should know George isn't in federal custody." Stella turned slowly. "He was released an hour ago." Eleanor's eyes were unreadable. Someone inside Reese's office pulled the order. George had nothing left to lose. That made him the most dangerous version of himself, and Stella knew it the moment Nathaniel's tracker went dark at 11:48 p.m. Not glitching. Not lost signal. Deliberately killed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. She had 20 minutes. Maybe 10. The penthouse was Eleanor's, a sterile, high-security floor in a building George technically still co-owned, which meant he had the override codes. Stella realized the mistake the instant the elevator hummed to life on its own, rising without being called. She moved the twins to the back bedroom, locked the door with the secondary bolt, and positioned herself in the dark beside the entryway with nothing but a letter opener and 18 months of white-hot fury. The elevator opened at 12:03 a.m. George looked like a man who had walked through fire and blamed the world for burning. His suit jacket was gone, his tie loose. The careful, curated armor of George Harmon, the voice, the posture, the performance, had been stripped completely away. What remained was something older and uglier. He saw her immediately. "I don't want them anymore," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you. George. You took everything." He stepped closer, and she held her ground because retreat was no longer an option. "My name, my empire, my family. You handed it all to my mother like a gift. You built a prison and called it a legacy." Her voice didn't waver. "I just found the door." He lunged. The lights died simultaneously, every single one, floor-wide, plunging them into absolute darkness. In the blackness, Stella heard two sounds. A struggle. Then silence. Then a voice she recognized that had no reason to be there. Diana Reese. Asterisk, drop it, Nathaniel. Asterisk. If you made it this far, you're not just watching, you're part of this story now. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. The lights came back on 30 seconds later. George blinked against the sudden brightness and understood, in one terrible moment of clarity, exactly what he had walked into. Reyes stood by the elevator. His Reyes. 3 years of loyalty, apparently purchased at a price George had never thought to match. Beside him, two men George recognized from the Salcedo organization, not enemies. Former soldiers. His soldiers, wearing the blank expression of men who had already been paid. Eleanor sat in the corner armchair like a throne, legs crossed, tea in hand, watching her son the way she'd always watched him, with the patient disappointment of someone waiting for an inevitable conclusion. And Nathaniel stood to the right of Stella, the gun no longer in his hand, but the implication hanging in the air like smoke. George turned slowly, cataloging each face. Every exit. Every angle. "You planned this from the parking garage," he said quietly. "Not a question." Before that, Stella stepped forward. "Since the morning you handed me a non-disclosure agreement instead of a name for our sons." She lifted her phone and pressed play. His voice filled the room, the hit order, pristine and damning, broadcasting live to Diana Reese's federal recorder 3 blocks away. Every word. Every second. Irrefutable. George's jaw tightened. "You'd burn everything to beat me. You taught me that." She held his gaze without flinching. "Consider it your legacy." Reyes moved to his left. Eleanor rose from her chair. The room contracted with quiet, coordinated finality. George Harmon, architect of empires, destroyer of inconvenient truths, had nothing left to command. He looked at Stella one last time. Something crossed his face that might have been respect. Then his phone screamed to life. A number she recognized instantly, her assistant's. Nobody answered the call. Stella took the phone from George's hand herself, turned it face down, and set it on the table with the quiet finality of a gavel strike. Whatever her assistant had to say could wait. Everything George Harmon had built was ending in this room, and she intended to witness every second of it. Diana Reese arrived at 12:31 a.m. with 6 federal agents and a warrant that had been 3 years in the making. She read it aloud without theater or triumph, just clean, precise language dismantling 30 years of carefully constructed empire, word by irrevocable word. George didn't resist. That was the part Stella hadn't anticipated. No final speech. No threat disguised as a farewell. He straightened his collar with both hands, a reflex, pure muscle memory, and walked toward Reese with the hollow dignity of a man who understood the game was over. At the door he stopped and looked back. Not at Eleanor. Not at Nathaniel. At Stella. "The boys," he said quietly. Just that. 2 words carrying the weight of everything he'd forfeited. She said nothing. She didn't owe him absolution. By 9 a.m., federal courts had filed dissolution papers against the Moretti organizational structure. Every subsidiary, every shell company, every laundered layer George had spent decades constructing, unwinding in real time across financial networks worldwide. The Harmon and Voss name was pulled from the firm's facade before noon. Eleanor watched the news coverage from the same armchair, expression unreadable. Stella held her sons and felt something loosen in her chest. Not peace. Not yet. But the first breath of something close to it. Then Nathaniel burst through the door, face drained of all color. "Your assistant," he said. She didn't just have the drive. He held up his phone with a shaking hand. "She made a copy. And she's already talking to the Salcedos." The courthouse was quiet on a Tuesday morning. Stella had chosen Tuesday deliberately, no press, no spectators, no occasion for anyone to assign meaning to what she was doing. This was not a performance. This was a door closing, softly and permanently, on everything that had tried to consume her. The clerk called her name at 9:15 a.m. She carried both boys in, one against each hip, their weight solid and real and hers. Nathaniel sat in the back row. Diana Reese had sent flowers to the safe house that morning with no note, just her initials. Even Eleanor, through a lawyer, had filed no objection. The judge was a small woman with reading glasses and no patience for ceremony. She reviewed the petition, asked 2 procedural questions, and signed without drama. Ethan Bennett. Noah Bennett. Stella said their names aloud in the corridor afterward, testing the sound of it, feeling the Harmon name fall away like something that had never truly fit. The boys were too young to understand. Someday she would tell them everything sanitized, then honest, then fully true as they grew old enough to carry it. But today they only knew her voice, her arms, her heartbeat. She had started to believe, for the first time in months, that ordinary life was genuinely possible. Nathaniel was waiting by the car. He looked wrong, too still, the way he went quiet when something had already gone irreversibly sideways. "The Salcedo meeting happened last night," he said without preamble. "Your assistant gave them everything." Stella buckled Noah in carefully. "We knew that was coming." "Stella." His voice dropped. "She gave them the new names." The street sounds fell away completely. She looked up slowly. Across the parking lot, a black SUV idled. Watching. The letter arrived with no postmark. Stella found it slipped beneath the door of the new apartment. 3rd floor, different city, different name on the lease, at 6 a.m., before the boys were awake, before Nathaniel had finished his coffee. Cream envelope. No return address. Her name written in the kind of handwriting that belonged to a generation that still considered penmanship a form of character. She recognized it immediately. She stood in the kitchen and read it once, slowly, then again. Asterisk, "You were never what George thought you were." He saw a variable to be controlled. "I saw what you were from the first dinner. The only person in that room who understood that power isn't taken. It's outlasted. You outlasted him. You outlasted all of them. The Bennett boys will never carry the weight of this name, and that is not a loss. That is the only mercy this family ever produced. You were the strongest Moretti that ever sat at our table. The difference is you were wise enough to stand up and leave it. Asterisk. E.H. No apology." Eleanor Harmon didn't apologize. But from a woman who communicated exclusively through lawyers and silence, this was the closest thing to reverence Stella had ever witnessed. She folded it carefully. "Set it down." Ethan stirred in the next room. Noah followed, their sounds overlapping, ordinary and miraculous. For 30 seconds, Stella let herself feel it. All of it. The grief and the fury and the exhaustion and the strange, ferocious pride of a woman who had walked into a fire and carried 2 lives out with her. Then her phone rang. Nathaniel. Before she could speak, the Salcedos found the apartment. Stella. A fist hit the front door. Hard. 3 times. The letter was still warm in her hand. She didn't run. For the first time in months, Stella planted her feet on the floor of that kitchen and did not move toward an exit. Something had shifted, calcified, in the 30 seconds she'd spent holding Eleanor's letter. Running had kept her alive. But running was finished now. She opened the door herself. Two men. Salcedo. The kind of faces that had stopped pretending to be anything other than what they were. Mrs. Harmon. Bennett. Her voice was granite. And you have 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't send everything I still have, and I have considerably more than you've been told, directly to every federal jurisdiction currently investigating your organization. The silence that followed was the most powerful she had ever occupied. They left without a word. Stella closed the door, turned around, and found both boys standing in the hallway in their pajamas, watching her with George's eyes in her own face, dark, serious, unnervingly still for children so small. She crossed to them and dropped to her knees and held them until her heartbeat steadied. She had spent every day since their birth trying to save them from their father, from his world, from the specific gravitational pull of a name that turned everything it touched into currency or wreckage. But kneeling there, she understood what Eleanor's letter had actually been. Not admiration. A warning. You were the strongest Moretti at the table. She hadn't escaped the Empire. She had inherited it. And the families circling her now weren't hunting a vulnerable woman with 2 children. They were circling a power vacuum and watching to see if she'd fill it. Ethan looked up at her with devastating calm. "Mama," he said quietly, "are the bad men coming back?" Stella looked at her sons and made a choice that would change everything. "No," she said. She almost believed it.